Misery is one of the most horrific movies I've ever seen. Not for the gore or for the amount of kills, but something that secretly, one way or the other, every creator fears, their own audience. Before we get into everything, for those of you that don't know, Misery is a film from 1991 that features both Kathy Bates and James Caan. Let me give you a refresher of the plot so you can understand what I'm talking about just in case it's been a minute. The rundown is that James Caan is an author that's finished his latest book. He gets in an accident and ends up getting saved by someone that ends up being a psychotic fan of his, who then kind of actually ends up keeping the author captive. You can kind of see where Stephen King got his inspiration for the book, because if you didn't know, this is based on a Stephen King book. But we'll talk about that more later. There are two major reasons that as a creator, as a writer, this movie horrifies me and plays with me emotionally, like almost subconsciously. As a creator, as an artist, a filmmaker, a podcaster, a YouTuber, a writer, the only thing you ever want is an audience. Someone who hears or watches or looks at something you make in some capacity. In fact, if you're watching this right now, you're a part of my audience. I don't feel like this because you guys aren't like that, but fandom online can be quite scary and very intense at times. So keep that kind of idea in mind. The things that happen in this movie are very intense and shows a very scary side of fandom that has shown a very dark side in history. Let's just take a look at the film for a second. Kathy Bates' character is named Annie Wilkes, who claims to be Paul Sheldon's, the author's, biggest fan. She has a deep emotional connection to a character named Misery Chastain that Paul had written. Paul had been feeling like he wants to finish up the story of Misery Chastain and wants to kill her off in his latest book. This is the book that he had written when Annie had found him in the car accident. Annie, because of her deep emotional ties to Misery and her character, absolutely despises that Misery is going to end up dying in this latest novel. She kidnaps him and basically forces him to rewrite his book that gives Misery a different ending and kind of resurrects her. Just as an interesting thought, I think we can draw some interesting parallels between this and the final season of Stranger Things. Annie Wilkes' obsession with Paul Sheldon's work made her feel like she could dictate how the story ended. Not unlike some Stranger Things fans and how they didn't like the ending, there had to be more. So they created plots and connected dots that weren't there in order to convince themselves that there was another episode coming. And that would make them feel better about the ending of the show. In fact, there was a whole term called conformity gate about this idea, which basically was just a highly popular fan theory about how Vecna, the villain from Stranger Things, was secretly tricking the characters in the show. This of course didn't end up happening and people became very upset about this idea. Some people became angry that it didn't happen. Others were embarrassed that the secret episode never really existed, even though they believed with all their hearts and souls that it did. Just like some Stranger Things fans, Annie believes she has the right to tell the creator and the author of her favorite book what should happen in his story simply because she's a massive fan of the work. She believed that she had the right to force the narrative to be what she wanted it to be, and she was going to kidnap and torture the author to get it. Stranger Things fans are hurt, disappointed, or frustrated by the way their favorite story ended, which are all valid feelings. On the other hand, for someone who lives in the extreme, a bad ending to a story can be like the earth imploding, which for Annie Wilkes caused her to resort to violence in order to rewrite that story. Fandom is not a bad thing. It can cause incredibly engaging conversations, it can create communities and many long-lasting relationships, but when fandom is brought to the extreme, like in Misery, Annie Wilkes shows that there isn't anything that someone won't do to get their way. But fandom is not the only reason Misery is terrifying. In fact, there's a much more personal reason this movie genuinely scares me. Misery becomes truly terrifying the moment you realize what happens when a creator loses control over their own work. The movie is frightening. Annie Wilkes and her horrifying actions define what is remembered about the film. However, there is another horrific aspect of this that is not discussed. Sometimes people think when your work becomes noticed, you become more in tune with your creativity and it becomes easier to maintain your creative control. I think some aspects of that are true, but on the other hand, the more people that interact with your work in one or the other, the easier it is for that work to be misconstrued, misunderstood, or taken differently than the way you intended it to be. Which is interesting because the creativity actually comes from those that are interpreting your work at that point, which is losing creative control over your own work, and that is one of the most terrifying aspects of putting your work out into the world. For example, you watching this video, you are likely making assumptions about me, my life, my personality, everything about me. Some of those might be true, some may not. Either way, you are interpreting me based on what I share, not on who I actually am, which is a very scary thing to kind of deal with. It's like you're being watched through glass, but you're not able to control what people leave that experience kind of interpreting you as. This is why when creativity becomes commercial, the pressure begins to build in you. Because as you begin to become more popular, the rise of demand to reach a level of success for your audience increases. The ability to experiment, test the waters, or otherwise try new things decreases, and you really can't do that anymore. Someone like Paul Sheldon, who gained massive success from his Misery Chastain series, felt like he was stuck in a rut. If he tries a more serious novel, his older fans might not like him. However, he feels that if he writes another Misery Chastain novel, that he's simply not writing another one just for money, but also succumbing his creative work to the commercialization of his work, which perfectly relates to the situation that Stephen King found himself when he was writing the book. After venturing out of his comfort zone and writing the sci-fi book Eyes of the Dragon, which he thought was interesting and a worthwhile endeavor, he took a leap with the project and it cracked underneath him, leaving him feeling like no matter what he did, he wouldn't be able to break free from the reputation that surrounded him. He would be stuck writing horror novels and never be able to write anything else. The most infamous scene from both the book and the movie, the scene that everyone talks about and knows about when it comes to Misery, the hobbling, is a visual depiction of how Stephen King felt when the audience rejected his new ideas. The audience demanded horror from Stephen King, and he felt that one way or the other, the audience was going to get what they wanted, even if that meant hitting his ankles with sledgehammers and forcing him to write at a typewriter. Trapped by his success, his reputation, and his fandom, Stephen King, just like Paul Sheldon in Misery, thought there was no way out, no room to breathe, just the thing that the audience demands, which is a nightmare that every creator has to face at some point. Misery isn't about Annie Wilkes holding Paul Sheldon hostage, or about the violence that the situation created. It's about the fear of your own audience, the weight of expectations bearing down on top of you. It's not about what you create, it's about how it's interpreted. What do you think about fandom and its expectations? Do you think the audience does hold power over the creators? Or do you think that the authors ultimately hold control? Thank you for watching, I really do appreciate it. Please make sure you like and subscribe, that would really mean everything to me. If you want to, you can follow us, it's at Metebyte Co. on TikTok and at Metebyte Company on Instagram. Listen to all the podcasts on the Metebyte Podcast Network. If you want to, you can head over to the Patreon. You get access to all kinds of great content. I would really appreciate that. It's $5 a month. It's the only tier, so you get access to everything for $5. Eventually, we might add some new tiers and get some bonus stuff on top of that, but that's way down the line. So for right now, $5, you get access to everything. Let me know what you thought about this video. I would really appreciate it. Thank you. Let me know what you thought about this video. I'd really appreciate it. So thank you all, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.